I'm John Batchelor. This is the John Batchelor Show. Mr. Kudlow, Larry Kudlow, my colleague and co-host of CNBC's Kudlow Reports and Kudlow Radio on the Weekend, continues with me. And I'm very pleased to welcome to my studio here at the end of the year Avik Roy of the Manhattan Institute, who keeps the Apothecary. And Avik was with Larry 24 hours ago, so we repeat some of the remarks that he cogently presented to the CNBC audience. But Avik, I want to go to a column you published 2 weeks ago now about the website and Obamacare on November 30th, but you were not looking at November 2013. You're looking at November 2014, and you're projecting out a year when we can say that the healthcare.gov problems have at least been alleviated, the disaster. You're asking what happens then if the numbers do not exist, if the numbers that the White House wants. Do they have a plan B, Avik? That's been a puzzle for some time.
They don't have a plan B because they've been naive about the ability of their administration to make things work, this whole time through. And the thing that they've been genuinely most concerned about secretly, they haven't wanted to admit this in public, is that the cost of the insurance plans under Obamacare are going to be much higher than what people experienced before. Because the line they've been propounding, and this continues to be true, is that if you have coverage today, you're not affected by Obamacare. Now, they've had to refine that because of the cancellations. Right. But they're still arguing that if you have employer-sponsored insurance, you're not going to be affected by Obamacare. And that is not true.
They said in 2010, 80 million people were going to have their insurance mutilated by Obamacare.
156 million Americans have employer-sponsored insurance through the private sector. And all of those people, almost all of them, are going to face much higher cost, 20% higher cost for insurance than they did previously. And what does that mean? That means if their employer is paying most of the premium, they're going to have to pay, the workers are going to have to pay more. Their salaries are going to go down because that's going to have to compensate for the cost. So all these things are going to affect people, and all those shoes are going to drop in the second half of 2014.
Much worse ahead, Larry.
Avik, walk through this. This is so important because I don't think people have properly focused on this. So that the costs are going to go up, the premiums are going to go up. The companies are not going to want to pay that. I take it that's what your point is. What happens at that point? Do they put the workforce into the exchanges, the lower incomes, and retailing and so forth go to Medicaid? How does this play out in terms of potential cancellations and so forth?
I think the evidence we have thus far is that there isn't going to be massive dumping of employer-sponsored coverage in the exchanges. What you're going to see is two things. One, in sectors of the economy where you have a lot of low-wage workers, like restaurants, for example, you're going to see people dumped into the exchanges, or people moved into part-time work so that they can qualify for the exchanges and subsidies on the exchanges. On the other end, the Walgreens, the General Motors, those kinds of companies, what they're going to do is they're going to set up private exchanges where the Fortune 500 company, gives you $5,000 to shop for an insurance plan on this exchange that we, the Fortune 500 company, have sponsored, and therefore we have fiscal certainty knowing that we're spending a certain amount on your health expenditures, and that's it. And the reason why that's going to be catalyzed by Obamacare is the Cadillac tax. There's an excise tax that's going to hit in 2018 where if the cost or the value of your health insurance plan is larger than a certain threshold defined by the law, you're going to pay massive taxes. So Fortune 500 companies are going to have an incentive to move to this model where instead of having a Cadillac benefit where they pay for everything, they're going to give you a certain amount of money and you're going to shop for coverage with that voucher in hand.
And so let's just stay with that for a second, because this too I think is not well known. These are private exchanges that are different than the Obamacare exchanges. Is that correct?
That's correct. The Obamacare exchanges are new constructs. These private exchanges, well, they're also new constructs, but they're entirely driven by the private sector. But the one thing that's important is that the private exchanges have subsidies, right? These tax credits that if you're low income enough, you can qualify for subsidies to have a discounted premium compared to what a middle class person might have. But let's not forget, that employer-sponsored insurance also involves a tax subsidy, because the value of your employer-sponsored coverage, you don't pay income tax on that, you don't pay state or local tax on that, you don't pay Medicare or Social Security tax on that. So from a tax standpoint, it's heavily advantaged relative to wages. And so there is a subsidy that goes along with employer-sponsored coverage that will still be available to people who will work on private exchanges.
But this is different than the Obamacare subsidy.
Absolutely. The Obamacare subsidy is a new subsidy. The employer-based, the employer tax exclusion, as it's called, has been around since World War II.
The numbers that are in this column you published at the Apothecary, 107 million losers to 14 million winners. Those 107 million losers, are those the people you're talking about that are going to be pushed out of their company plans?
They are. And, this is the interesting thing, is because I've long been a skeptic that after the 2012 elections, with Obamacare being able to be the law of the land for 7 years, that Republicans have been able to come in 2017 and repeal the law. The one counter argument to my view is this idea that there are going to be so many people who are going to pay more for health insurance than they did before, and if they're ginned up enough and they're angry enough, there could be a case for repeal, even if 25 million people are thrown off their Obamacare health insurance plans.
They're going to pay more with narrower networks.
Yeah,
and that is enough. Go ahead, Larry.
And just a question came up on our show tonight. Do you think this is the time for the Republicans to put their alternative healthcare plan on the table? They haven't been able to get a unified plan yet. The Conservative Republican Study Committee has a plan. They got 117 votes, but they couldn't carry the House or the leadership. In other words, is this the moment when the GOP has got to say to the public, look, we can do this better, here's how?
It would be nice for the Republican Party and the conservative movement to unify around an alternative. The problem is that unity doesn't exist. Even the Republican Study Committee, which you alluded to, they themselves couldn't agree. There were two factions. There was a group that said, let's just have a Bush 2007 style plan where the tax deduction for employer-sponsored insurance is standardized and accessible to people who don't get insurance through their employer. That will only modestly improve coverage. Other people say, let's give a universal tax credit. John McCain proposed that in 2008. Paul Ryan has proposed that. Tom Coburn has proposed that. But a lot of people who are further to the right say oppose that because that involves more spending on the uninsured through the tax code. So that division was litigated within the Republican Study Committee, and the more conservative group won, which is, say, the group that said, let's just have a modest increase in coverage and less expenditures on the uninsured, which means to say if there's a repeal and replace plan that involves the RSC plan, that means 20 million people will lose their health insurance as of the status quo of 2017.
I want to focus on one piece that Larry talked about on his show tonight. Larry, it's the pre-existing condition community, and Larry calls them the sick. And I take Larry's point and I express it to you, Avik. I am frustrated that the Republican Party allows the Obama administration and the president in particular to maintain the high ground of I care for the sick people.
Yeah, this is a really important point. I'm glad you brought this up. I was testifying before Congress last week, and as happens every time I testify before Congress, some congressman gets up and gives a speech about how, well, before the Affordable Care Act, there were 50 million people who were uninsured in America because they had pre-existing conditions. And that is a lie. There are not 50 million people in America who don't have health insurance because they have pre-existing conditions. There are about 300,000 people in America who don't have health insurance because they have a pre-existing condition. There are 49 million people who don't have health insurance in America because health insurance is too expensive. And what does Obamacare do? It makes health insurance even more expensive, giving those people less of an incentive to buy health insurance.
What about the 300,000? Say there are 2 million of them. Tonight, Larry, I heard a congressman say that it's possible to set up state by state special plans that can help people who can't get insurance that is competitive in the marketplace.
Well, risk pools. They're called risk pools. But, I'm all for the risk pools. But if at the end of the day, whatever the numbers of sick people who are uninsured, I think the Republican Party has to be willing to say, you know what? We will just give you the money. We will subsidize it. But we'll do it on the budget, and we'll do it in a transparent way so everyone will know and can vote yay or nay on that. I mean, I think it has to come down to that. that in effect we have to care for them. We can't cede the the high moral ground, as John calls it, and we'll just give it to them. We'll just give it to them. In fact, I might even go a step further. It'll be so much cheaper than this Obama rigmarole. Not only would I give it to them, I would give everybody, every new child born, a health savings account. Everyone, and I'd give them $500 to start with to set one up. This was something that has been tried, discussed before. Harold Ford, congressman in Tennessee, Jack Kemp actually talked about this many years ago. At some point, you just gotta be willing to say it'll be a whole lot cheaper than the road we're going down now.
I want to mention that reporting from Massachusetts, Avik knows as well, we talked about it, that Massachusetts, Romney Care had a plan to deal with the pre-existing conditions. The people there, they've all been unhorsed by Obamacare, and they're in a panic in Massachusetts right now because of people with pre-existing conditions who are going to have no health insurance come January 1st because of the failure of the site. Massachusetts could do it on the Massachusetts basis. Can't we do that in every state of it?
We're singing from the same hymnal here. I mean, the point that you're making, Larry, and you, John, as well, is that there are ways to address the problem of pre-existing conditions in a way that doesn't massively drive up the cost of health insurance for everyone else. And that is the false dichotomy that the administration has laid upon us, that, well, the only way to solve the pre-existing conditions problem is to massively disrupt the health insurance market in a way that drives up the cost for everyone. That's not true. That has been the Trojan horse ideologically for the administration to do a lot of other things that aren't necessary to address that problem.
And Larry, your opinion, do the Republicans you speak to, because you have a wide range of correspondents in the party, do they understand this point, that alone has been unsaid by the Republican leadership?
Some do, most don't. You know what? The thing becomes symbolic. I mean, actually, it's like the Pope talking. You have to care for the poor. And this is an old Republican saw. And that the GOP has to say to the country, we have better ways to achieve the health insurance market altogether. But we also, if we need to be, we will take special measures to help the least among us, the most sick among us. They have to be willing to say that. And they don't say that, Avik. And I don't think it's that hard to fix, as you noted. I don't think it's that hard to fix. I think they just have to come out and say it. It has great symbolic value. That's what I'm saying.
Mr. Romney did it. Mr. Romney managed it for Massachusetts, and now it's been wrecked by the Affordable Care Act, and it has to be recovered. Avik Roy of the Manhattan Institute, thank you, Avik, for coming in. And Larry Kudlow of CNBC's Kudlow Report and Kudlow Radio on the Weekend. I'm John Batchelor.